I'm the grandson of this monster, right? A man that, industrially murdered more than 1 million people, right? In my heart, I felt, what can I do to give those Jewish people a hug? I'm so sorry for what my family did to you guys.
Kai was a boy biking past smokestacks, oblivious that the ash on his clothes came from the pyres next door. In their villa, Paradise, his grandmother sipped tea while screams echoed over the wall. This is the true story behind the Zone of Interest. 7th grade changed everything. Now Rudolf Höss's grandson is admitting what the family memoir reveals they saw. How did a nice Catholic boy build history's death factory and maintain this generational family denial? Villa next to hell. Imagine standing in a garden so lush it was nicknamed Paradise. You've got a swimming pool for the kids, a private orchard, and a porch where a mother, Hedwig, sits sipping tea and tending to her prize-winning flowers. It sounds like the ultimate mid-century dream, right? But here's the thing that'll make your skin crawl. If you stood on your tiptoes in that garden, you could see the chimneys. Not the chimneys of a cozy fireplace, but the chimneys of the world's most efficient killing machine. That's the reality Kai Höss's grandfather, Rudolf, built for his family. And to understand how he got there, we actually have to go back to a quiet, strictly Catholic home in Baden-Baden around 1901. Rudolf wasn't born a monster. In fact, his father was a devout man who desperately wanted his son to become a priest. But the world had other plans. When World War I broke out, Rudolf didn't head for the pulpit. He lied about his age and became the youngest non-commissioned officer in the German army at just 14 years old. Think about that for a second. By the time he was a teenager, he was already hardened by the trenches. He didn't find God in the war. He found a new religion called National Socialism. And it turns out he was very, very good at following orders. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and honestly, pretty terrifying. In June 1941, Rudolf gets a personal summons from Heinrich Himmler. This wasn't a standard briefing. Himmler basically told him that the final solution was beginning and that Auschwitz was the chosen site because it was perfectly isolated and sat right on the major European rail lines. Before this, Auschwitz was just a miserable labor camp for Polish prisoners.
Auschwitz is a place where the horror of the Holocaust is very visible.
But Rudolf was a man who obsessed over efficiency. He didn't just want a prison, he wanted a factory. But wait, he had a problem. Shooting thousands of people a day was messy, and it was taking a psychological toll on his SS guards. He needed a cleaner way to do it. And get this, the solution didn't even come from him. It came from one of his subordinates, Karl Fritsch, who decided to test a pesticide called Zyklon B on 600 Russian prisoners of war.
Zyklon 5, cyanide gas. We squeezed 700 people in here.
And about 250 sick inmates in the basement of Block 11. Rudolf watched the whole thing. He later wrote in his memoir that he felt relieved when he saw it work. Relieved because now the killing could be industrial. It could be quiet. This innovation allowed him to scale up the horror to a degree that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. We're talking about gas chambers that could hold 2,000 people at a single time.
Disturbing. This is one of them, the gas chambers.
During the peak of the operations in 1944, when the Hungarian Jews arrived, they killed 430,000 people in just 56 days. The crematoria couldn't even keep up. They actually had to dig massive pits to burn the bodies in the open air because the machines literally broke under the weight of the murder. But while this was happening literally a few hundred yards away, life inside the villa was perfectly normal. Rudolf's 5 children, Klaus, Heidetraut, Ingebrigit, Hans-Jürgen, and Annegret, played in the garden. They had servants who were prisoners from the camp. They had a pool with a slide. Hedwig, Rudolf's wife, called it her paradise and famously said she wanted to live there until she died. Think about the level of denial required to ignore the smell. Because there was a smell. It was everywhere. It was the scent of burning hair and fat that hung over the garden like a thick fog. At night, the sky didn't turn black. It glowed a dull, sickly orange from the pyres. Do you think it's actually possible to raise a family, have picnics, and celebrate birthdays while ignoring the literal smoke of a death factory drifting over your fence? Or was the denial the only thing keeping that paradise from collapsing? Rudolf was so meticulous that he kept detailed logs of everything. In his Nuremberg affidavit later on, he estimated that 2.5 million people were gassed under his watch, though historians later adjusted that number to a still unfathomable 1.1 million. He wasn't a screaming fanatic, he was a bureaucrat. He viewed the people in the trains as units to be processed. He'd spend his day calculating how to speed up the gassing process, and then he'd go home, take off his uniform, and read bedtime stories to his kids. That's the legacy Kai Höss was born into. A legacy of a nice Catholic boy who became the architect of hell while making sure his own children had a beautiful garden to play in. For decades, the family kept a suffocating silence about what really happened on the other side of that wall. They stayed in that bubble of denial, passing down the lie that they didn't know, or that Rudolf was just a soldier doing a difficult job. Kai grew up in that heavy, unspoken silence until he hit the 7th grade, and a single school assignment shattered that paradise forever. Family's buried secret. Kai Höss grew up in a home where the past was essentially a room with no door. It was just a blank space in the family history. He knew his grandfather was a soldier who died in the war, which was a common enough story in post-war Germany, and nobody really felt the need to dig deeper. But here is where the story shifts from a quiet family life to a complete psychological breakdown. In Germany, the education system takes the Holocaust very seriously, and it's a mandatory part of the curriculum when you hit the 7th grade. Kai is sitting in his history class, just a regular kid, when the teacher starts showing slides of the liberation of the camps. Then it happens. The name Höss appears on the screen. It's not a common name. It's not like being a smith or a miller. Kai sees the name Rudolf Höss linked to the most efficient extermination center in human history. And suddenly, the air in the room just disappears. He's looking at mountains of shoes and piles of eyeglasses, and the name of the man who supervised it all is the same name on his own birth certificate. He goes home that day feeling like he's carrying a lead weight in his stomach. He walks into the kitchen and asks his mother point blank if they are related to that man. And here is where the family's defense mechanism kicks in. His mother doesn't say yes, and she doesn't say no. She just looks at him and says, "You need to ask your father about that." Now, we have to talk about Kai's father, Hans-Jürgen. He's about 87 or 88 years old now, and he has lived his entire life in a state of absolute, unbreakable denial. When Kai finally sat him down to talk about it, the response was chillingly calm. Hans-Jürgen told his son that Rudolf was the best father in the world. He talked about how Rudolf would take them swimming in the Sola River, and how he was a gentle, nice guy who loved his kids. This is a man who is nearly 90 years old, and he still refuses to acknowledge that while his father was being gentle with him, he was signing orders to gas thousands of other children just a few hundred yards away. In fact, Hans-Jürgen was so committed to the secret that he actually hid his true identity from his own wife for the first 5 years of their marriage. Think about the level of effort that takes. You're building a life, a home, and a future with someone, but you're keeping a ghost in the closet that you refuse to even name. But the silence wasn't just at Kai's dinner table. It was a family-wide pact. After Rudolf was executed in 1947, the family just disappeared.
Rudolf Höss, who was tried and sentenced to death, was hanged here on the 16th of April 1947.
They didn't change their name, but they moved. They kept their heads down, and they made a silent agreement never to discuss the work Rudolf did at the camp. They treated the Auschwitz years like a successful business venture that had simply gone under. To them, Rudolf wasn't a war criminal. He was a provider who had been unlucky enough to be on the losing side. And get this, it gets even weirder when you look at Kai's uncle, Rainer. Rainer didn't find out the truth from a school book or a quiet talk with his parents. He was working in a garden when an older man, a gardener who happened to be a survivor of the camp, recognized his facial features. The man looked at him with this mixture of horror and recognition and told him exactly who his grandfather was. Imagine being a young man and having a stranger tell you that your family legacy is written in the blood of millions. It's enough to break anyone, and for a long time, it did. Now, I want to ask you something because this is where history gets personal. When did your family history shock you? Maybe it wasn't a global tragedy, but we all have those moments where we realize our parents or grandparents aren't who we thought they were. For Kai, the real breaking point came when he stopped asking his father for the truth and started looking for it himself. He found a copy of his grandfather's memoir, Commandant of Auschwitz, just sitting on a shelf. It wasn't locked away in a safe or buried in the backyard. It was right there. Reading those words changed everything. It wasn't a history book written by a stranger. It was his own grandfather's voice, recorded while he was in prison, awaiting execution. In those pages, Rudolf wasn't the nice guy who took his kids swimming. He was a cold, calculating technocrat who complained about the technical difficulties of killing people faster. He wrote about the logistics of the gas chambers with the same tone a factory manager might use to talk about a supply chain issue. He admitted to what he saw inside. He described the special actions and the way people reacted when they realized what was happening. Seeing those words in his grandfather's own hand destroyed any remaining shred of the nice guy myth. It turned Kai from a confused son into a man on a mission. He realized that the only way to stop the poison of the past was to drag it into the light. By 2024 and 2025, Kai has taken on a role that his father would probably consider a betrayal. He's become an ambassador for truth, working with Jewish organizations and even visiting the site of the villa for a recent documentary. He's a pastor now in Stuttgart, and he views his life's work as a form of repentance for a man he never met, but whose crimes he still carries. But even with all the work he's doing, the shadow of the memoir hangs over him. Because once you read what Rudolf admits he saw inside those walls, you can never go back to being just a regular kid with a regular last name. The truth hit him via his grandfather's own words, and those words revealed horrors that Rudolf didn't just oversee, he perfected them. Memoir's chilling insider view. Imagine you're sitting in a cold, damp prison cell in Poland. The year is 1947, and the world has just finished watching the Nuremberg trials. You know you're going to die. The gallows is literally being built within sight of your window. Most people would use that time to beg for mercy or write letters to their kids. But Rudolf Höss was a different breed. At the request of the Polish authorities, he sat down and wrote his life story. It wasn't a poem or a plea. It was a manual on how to erase people from existence. This is the book Kai Höss eventually picked up off the family shelf. And let me tell you, it's not just a history lesson. It's a descent into a mind that has completely disconnected from the concept of human life. Rudolf wrote with this terrifyingly calm, detached tone. He didn't use words like murder or atrocity. He used words like processing, logistics, and technical improvements. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, quite sickening. He admits in the memoir that the whole reason Auschwitz became what it was, the headquarters for the Holocaust, was because he was a pioneer. He described how he took the Zyklon B tests we talked about earlier and turned them into a seamless assembly line. He didn't just see the trains arriving, he saw them as a delivery schedule that had to be managed without disturbing the normal flow of life. That phrase alone, no disturbance to normal life, tells you everything you need to know. He was worried about the schedule while the world was on fire. Inside those pages, Rudolf breaks down the numbers with the pride of an honor student. He claimed in his affidavit that he oversaw the death of roughly 2.5 million people, though he later recalculated and landed closer to 1.1 million. But it's the speed that he's most proud of. During what they called Operation Höss, when the Hungarian Jews were brought in, they were liquidating 10,000 people every single day. Think about that number for a second. That is a small town every 24 hours, entirely wiped out. He describes the selections on the ramp, the way he'd watch mothers being separated from children, and he writes about it like he's describing a weather report. He says that the most difficult part wasn't the killing itself, but the emotional burden it placed on his men. He was actually worried about the psychological health of the murderers, not the victims. But wait, it gets much more personal than just numbers. There's a specific moment Kai read in that memoir that probably changed his soul forever. Rudolf describes a young woman who was being led toward the gas chamber. She realized what was happening and she fell at his feet, pleading for the lives of her children. Now, any human being with a pulse would feel a surge of empathy, right? But Rudolf's reaction was entirely different. He describes how he felt uncomfortable because her screaming was upsetting the other prisoners and making the process less efficient. So, he pulled his pistol and shot her himself. He actually framed this in his writing as a mercy because it saved her from the agony of waiting in the gas chamber. This is the man Kai's father called a nice, gentle guy.
Yes, the father of Zyklon B, the lethal gas that we are all familiar with, was indeed the chemist Fritz Haber, a German Jew.
And it wasn't just the gas chambers. Rudolf admitted to the use of standing cells, tiny stone boxes where 4 prisoners would be crammed in so tightly they couldn't sit or lie down, sometimes for nights on end, before being marched out to the Black Wall for execution. He saw all of this. He walked past these cells on his way home to have dinner with Hedwig and the kids. He saw the pits being dug for the overflow of bodies when the crematoria chimneys literally cracked from the heat of constant use. He saw the ash falling like snow on his children's playground, and he admitted in writing that he knew exactly where it was coming from. He just didn't care. For Kai, these words were the final nail in the coffin of his family's denial. Rudolf spent a lot of time in his memoir trying to explain his obedience. He claimed he was just a cog in the machine, and that his strict Catholic upbringing had prepared him to follow orders without question. But here's the thing that Kai realized as he turned those pages. Rudolf had choices. He wasn't some mindless robot. He was an innovator. He was the one who suggested the use of the pits when the ovens failed. He was the one who worked with the chemical companies to ensure the Zyklon B was delivered on time.
And today I want to talk to you about how Zyklon B worked and the story behind this chemical compound.
He wasn't just following a plan, he was building it. He admitted that he saw the inside of every single part of the operation, from the gas chambers to the gold teeth being pulled from the mouths of the dead. He was an eyewitness to his own crimes. In his final days, Rudolf wrote that he was content with his life and that he had served his country well. He even dared to write a letter to his children telling them to be good people and to follow their consciences. Can you imagine receiving a letter like that from a man who had just admitted to the industrial murder of 1 million people? The level of cognitive dissonance is absolutely staggering. He truly believed he could separate his work from his soul. But Kai rejects that spin entirely. He sees the memoir for what it really is, a map of a monster's mind. For Kai, reading about the selections and the special actions wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a confrontation with the genetic code of his own family. He realized that the Paradise Villa wasn't just next to hell. It was powered by it. The vegetables in their garden were fertilized by the people Rudolf had processed. The clothes the kids wore were often taken from the luggage of the people Rudolf had shot. Here's where it gets even more intense. Kai didn't just read the book and walk away. He started comparing the dates in the memoir to his family's personal photos. He found pictures of his father as a young boy, playing in the yard on the very same days Rudolf was recording record-breaking death tolls in his logs. That's a level of truth that no family secret can survive. But Kai's father, Hans-Jürgen, still won't look at it. He still clings to the memory of the gentleman who took him swimming. Kai, on the other hand, chose to look at the blood on the hands that held his father. And that choice, that decision to believe the memoir over the family myth, is what led him to the ultimate confrontation. Kai isn't just a grandson anymore. He's a witness. And the next part of this story is where the silence doesn't just break, it explodes. Grandson's raw admissions. Kai Höss didn't just walk away from that wall in Auschwitz with a heavy heart. He walked away with a completely different life. Imagine for a second being a man who carries the name of the greatest mass murderer in history, and instead of changing that name or hiding in a small town, you decide to stand in a pulpit in Stuttgart every Sunday. That is exactly what Kai does. He's a pastor at a Bible church now, into a living, breathing apology for a crime he didn't commit, but one he refuses to forget. Now, here is where the story gets really current and, honestly, quite intense. Just recently, in early 2026, Kai stood up in Berlin during the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. He wasn't there to give a polite academic speech. He stood before a global audience and looked them in the eye, calling his grandfather exactly what he was, the greatest mass murderer in human history. He didn't use the soft language his father used. He didn't talk about a nice guy who got caught up in a bad system. He talked about choice. He told the world that Rudolf Höss had a choice every single morning when he put on that uniform, and he chose the gas chambers every single time. And get this, Kai has gone further than almost anyone else in his family. He's met with survivors. He sat across the table from people who still have the numbers tattooed on their arms, numbers that his grandfather's men put there. In one of the most gut-wrenching moments of his journey, he looked at a group of Jewish people and told them,
However, Haber, as a Jewish person, was later forced to leave Germany and died while fleeing the country.
"By all rights, you should hate me." He didn't ask for a hug. He didn't ask for instant forgiveness. He just stood there and owned the bloodline. But here's the beautiful, almost unbelievable part. Many of those survivors reached back. There's a story about him meeting with a survivor who told him that he wasn't his grandfather. That single moment of grace did more to break the curse of the Höss name than 80 years of family silence ever could. Kai often talks about the heart of his grandfather. You'll hear some people try to say that Rudolf had a good heart, but was just a soldier following orders. Kai rejects that entirely. He says that the heart is revealed by what you do when you have power over the powerless. If you can shoot a pleading mother to keep your schedule on track, your heart isn't good. It's a void. This realization is what drives him to be an outspoken supporter of Israel today. He teaches his own children and his congregation that silence in the face of evil is the same thing as participation. He's basically the ultimate anti-Rudolf. Where his grandfather built walls to hide the truth, Kai is tearing them down to expose it. But wait, I want to ask you something because this is a question that people have been debating for centuries. Can blood guilt actually be broken? Is it possible for a grandson to truly wash away the stains of a grandfather's crimes? Or are we all just carrying the ghosts of our ancestors, whether we like it or not? Because Kai's life is basically a giant experiment in answering that question. The year 2026 has been a big one for Kai. In a recent interview, he talked about how he feels a holy responsibility to be a witness. He's seen how fast the world forgets. He's seen the rising tide of people who claim the Holocaust never happened or that the numbers were exaggerated.
I'm willing to be part of this if the Holocaust is not in any way,
And when he hears those people, he doesn't just get angry, he gets loud. He points to the memoir. He points to the villa. He points to his own father's hollow denial and says, "I am the living proof of what happens when a family tries to bury the truth." He's even found a strange kind of alliance with his cousin, Rainer, who famously tattooed a Star of David and the word Auschwitz on his chest as a way to never forget. While they have different ways of expressing it, they are both part of a new generation of Germans who refuse to let the paradise myth survive. They are the ones who have to explain to the world that evil doesn't always look like a movie villain. Sometimes it looks like a father who reads bedtime stories. Sometimes it looks like a mother who is more worried about her prize-winning hydrangeas than the smoke coming from the chimneys next door. For Kai, his faith is the anchor in all of this. He believes that grace is the only thing that can truly heal the kind of damage Rudolf Höss inflicted on the world. But he's also very clear that grace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering everything. The 10,000 people gassed in a day.
It may seem absurd, but the lethal gas that caused the deaths of millions of people was actually invented by a Jewish person.
The 430,000 Hungarians, the standing cells, and the mercy shootings, and choosing to build something different on top of those ruins. He's essentially turned the Höss name into a tool for reconciliation. Instead of a brand of shame, he's made it a brand of accountability. As we look at Kai today, standing in his church or speaking at memorials in Berlin, we're seeing a man who has finally stepped out from the shadow of the villa. He's no longer the kid in the 7th grade who was terrified by a slide in a history class. He's a man who has looked into the abyss, read the manual of murder written by his own blood, and decided that the story doesn't have to end with a hanging in 1947. It can end with a pastor in 2026 telling the world that truth is the only thing that can set a family free. But the most chilling part of all of this is that the lessons Rudolf Höss left behind aren't just for his grandson. They are for all of us. Because the villa is still there. The wall is still there. And the human capacity to build a paradise right next to a hell is just as strong today as it was in 1940. If we don't listen to the admissions Kai has dragged into the light, we're not just ignoring history. We're inviting it to repeat itself. Echoes in modern shadows. The film, The Zone of Interest, recently brought this villa to life with terrifying accuracy. They mapped the distance from the pool to the crematoria down to the centimeter, because the truth is, the blindness was a choice. Today, we're facing a new version of that garden wall. In 2026, AI history fakes and deepfakes are circulating to soften the image of the SS or deny the gas chambers entirely. These digital distortions are designed to do exactly what the family silence did for Kai's father. They offer a comfortable lie, so you don't have to face the brutal reality. Kai spends his days now fighting these modern shadows. He knows that if you can fake the past, you can justify any horror in the future. We see villa denial whenever we ignore modern atrocities because it's more convenient for our politics or our comfort. It's the same as Hedwig tending roses while the pits burned next door. Kai's journey proves we aren't just cogs in a machine. We can choose to look over the wall. One family's truth demands that we all reflect. Kai Höss shattered 80 years of family myths by admitting the horrific truth his grandfather recorded. From industrial gassings to the villa paradise built on ash, we've seen that evil thrives in silence. But can you truly forgive the grandson? Was Kai right to break his father's peace? Share your shock below, and we'll see you in our next video.